the recording. So thank you for attending today's product council session, and I apologize for my voice. I've got an awful cold. Um, but let me find my presentation. Yeah. Okay, just sharing my screen, hoping you can see that now. So today we're going to be talking about the ISO 222 work stream. I'll give you an update on that and the work that's gone on, the extensive work that's gone on that, and gather any opinions people have about it, and really make sure that we're heading in the right direction. Before we get into that, I want to see this, get rid of that. I hope you can see my presentation okay. I wanted to give you an update on all of the work streams as they stand today. Make that a bit bigger. Yep, excuse me. Right. So these are the work streams that we currently have in place. The only thing that's changed here since you last saw it was I've taken out the work streams that essentially weren't really progressing at all and pushed them out to the next PI. And I've added an extra work stream here, which is about participation tools for fintechs. That's at the specific request of one of our adopters who's particularly keen to get as many fintechs as possible to be able to interconnect into their deployment. So we want to try and make that as easy as possible. So that's a new work stream. Limited amount of work done on it so far. Although we have an initial adopter, as in our switch, but we are keen to make sure this is a generic solution. And we're looking at some of the work that's gone on in the open banking space there for an initial approach. And hopefully this will actually, and this is very germane to today's discussion, we hope that we'll be able to engage with the ISO 222 RMG to talk about potential extensions for fintech messaging. So that's something that may come up in coming weeks and months, to be honest. The others, if we have people here who are leading work streams, I would ask you to check that you agree with my assessment of the progress of the work streams. Participation tools is doing pretty well, but the work is actually probably going to need to be submitted for DA review at some point. There has been a lot of engagement there, though, and some good work that's been done. On-premise deployments, yeah, we've got significant progress there, and we actually have one of our community members has done an on-premise deployment under the guidance of Nathan and Sam, which is a huge step forward, and they've promised to document it. Merchant payments, we saw last week, has done well, and I actually now have a video of the demonstration, which I'll be sharing later today. Into Scheme and FX, again, a lot of progress there, and you've had Paul Baker and the Infotex team talking about that extensively, and hopefully we'll have more to say on that soon. ISO 222 we'll talk today. Localization, at least the specification is in place now. The backlog is in place, is starting to be in place, but there's a lot of work to do. vNext, I don't want to say anything about that now. Next gen settlement for vNow is a real bugbear. We need that, and we don't have anyone who's working on it, and I would hope that somebody will step forward and start to contribute to that soon. Are the remaining ones performance optimization? Well, we want to produce a white paper about the performance. We need some support on that, and Julie's pushing quite hard for that. Platform quality and security, Sam has done some amazing stuff there, continues to do so, and we saw it at the DA last week, and core and releases likewise. If there's anything on this dashboard you disagree, now's the time to tell me, going to be presenting this to the TGB later today, so any input gratefully received. On to today, I just wanted to give a bit of context here. There is quite a lot of complexity and work within this ISO 222 workstream, so I put together this sort of mini roadmap with the ultimate goal being a modular loop, which is an inclusive instant payment system that integrates with DFSPs participants using IIPS ISO 222 messaging. That's our ultimate aim. So we therefore are looking at new IIPS deployments. A lot of our adopters are first-time deployers, and that's where this fits in, and where they specify ISO 222. And in that work, Michael has been doing a lot of work in specifying the ISO 222 messages, and that's all been submitted to the RMG. And Julie is now leading the work stream overall, and has done a lot of the testing or thought leading on how to implement that messaging. We've now moved into actually the development. Paul Baker is leading on the development, evolving us from FSP IP to inclusive IPS ISO 222. And that will ultimately lead us to our target. However, we have a lot of existing IPSs out there, instant payment systems, that claim to use ISO 222, but essentially what they've done is just pick from the menu of ISO 222 messages and done their own variation of it. And in many cases, they are not able to offer any of the inclusive functionality that we would like. And that's the reason why Michael's in particular spent a lot of time looking at ISO 222 messaging and making sure that it could actually support those inclusive features that make Mojo distinctive. So we want these adopters who have an IPS already to be able to adopt Mojo and to ultimately evolve to the target of an inclusive IPS with ISO 222 IIPS messaging. And we see the step to that as, first of all, the development of an adapter that can integrate using FSP IOP. And James has done a lot of work on that in the most recent case being with IPSL in Kenya. And then we hope that we'll be able to encourage them to migrate to using the more formal IIPS ISO 222 messaging over time, so that we achieve this ultimate aim. So that's my context and scene setting piece. I'm sorry I've taken so long over that. And I will now hand over to the workstream lead, which is Julie, and ask her to take it from there.
Hi, thank you, Paul. So I just wanted to share a bit like what the workstream has been working on recently, and we've been originally starting from defining what are the message within the ISO 222 catalog that we want to use. And then since we've been moving to the next step, which is like defining a mapping between the ISO 222 message that we have identified for a specific flow and what is the corresponding FXP IOP field. So I'm just going to share my screen for a minute to present. That is a spreadsheet we've been working on. I'm not going to go into the detail of the spreadsheet. If you want to look into each mapping, I would suggest that, am I sharing the right screen? Yes. I would suggest that you join the ISO 222 Slack channel, and in this channel, this spreadsheet is actually shared. So what we have here is like, for example, on the put party of our API, Here we have the FSP IOP field, and basically what we've been doing over the past few weeks is working on what is the corresponding ISO 222 field. So effectively doing a field mapping starting from our, our FSP IOP API. So yeah, and for each type, so here you have all the parties and we have the postcodes, put quote. So for all of them, like we've been essentially working on this. So all this mapping. And today, what Paul Baker is going to present is actually the end-to-end flow for the discovery phase. So show effectively these APIs. So as Paul making mention, we are now like almost finishing this phase of specification. And the Infitex team is working on doing the development on this with Paul Baker leading this work. As basically like a next phase of the ISO 222 workstream, as Paul alluded to already, will be probably looking at the third-party API, working with some external consultants that are also like specialized in the open banking space. Is there any question on this, on the spreadsheet framework overall, or what we're doing?
Maybe just an elaboration, Julie.
Okay.
The messages that are currently on the list that are being mapped in that spreadsheet include the P2P flow and the foreign exchange calls. So they are included. Obviously, we need to convert everything, but right now that's the initial focus.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks for this clarification. And even when we work out on the catalog of messages, so which message we're going to use for which API, we excluded a few. So all the admin API have been excluded by default. And originally, the third-party API have been excluded as well. Thanks for this, Paul. Okay, so if there is no other question or comment, in that case, I'll stop sharing and I'll give the floor to Paul again. Please, we invite everybody to, I see Rob has a question, but we invite everybody to review the spreadsheet in detail and comment on the spreadsheet either in the work stream or directly to us. But Rob, please.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the fields you've got as no substitute not required, particularly things like date of birth, which will all be used for KYC information. Where is KYC information being held then? Because it is available in the ISO field specification, but not mapped.
That is a fantastic question, Rob. Just because we're not doing it in our mapping doesn't mean it isn't going to be part of the API and usable and provided. It's just there is no requirement in the center of the switch to do that translation because in the center we don't make use of that field specifically. In fact, I would say ISO does a better job of understanding their KYC information. So the reason why we can't do a direct mapping to the date of birth is because if you are providing KYC information in ISO, you can't just provide a date of birth. You also need to provide the city of birth, and there's a whole host of other pieces of information. So we don't have a direct translation into FSP-IOP, but we also don't need it in the switch. So I think an important thing to understand here is the original ISO message that is sent is going to be the same ISO message that is forwarded on to the end participant. So the ISO message will be untampered with end to end. So if fields that we haven't included in our mapping are part of that ISO structure, they will get to the end destination. We just in the switch, there isn't a direct requirement to do that mapping.
Okay, so that information is available for all services hanging off the switch that do require that, though. Under that statement, it will get to the end state, so it's available within the flow.
Yeah. Yes. So maybe let's drill down explicitly, because I think this concerns you. So because it is a call to the switch, it'll be part of the audit logging. It won't be used necessarily by the things managing positions, the handlers managing positions, or account lookup, or building or forwarding on the quotes, or working out how to do the routing of the quotes. But because that full message will be forwarded on to the DFSPs will get that end message and will be able to work with it. So all the right people are getting it. It's in the audit. It's at the DFSPs.
I'm going to reword the question because
Okay.
I'm thinking specifically for CAMISA, where they have a regulatory requirement to capture and view that. They're holding the switch. They won't have the DFSP endpoints. So the data is available as one of the Kafka queues and can be listened to and picked up and forwarded for compliance monitoring.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So the current payment platform adapter that's been built as a POC reads off the audit topic, and it will absolutely be in that audit topic.
Okay, thanks.
Great.
And if you have any more input like this, Rob, I would also invite you to join the Workstream, because we had exactly this conversation in our last meeting, actually, talking about how we make sure that all the KYC data, if they are received in an ISO format, are forwarded to effectively any sanction fraud system and so on. I mean, any FinCrime system overall.
Yeah. So Julie, just before this call, I sat with the developer to see what we could demonstrate, and in fact, it's not a very convincing demo. So I'm not going to be showing the end-to-end demo, but I'm going to be showing examples of the payload because I think that is interesting, and really show you the approach that we're taking in building this and exactly where we are in that process, because I think that's relevant to this audience.
Thank you.
So let me start with that. Great. So we have can you see that? Is it? Oh, okay, great. So what are we doing? So I thought I'd just start with a quick animation. We got the 3 phases of a transfer. I haven't included in FX, but is really part of the discovery and agreement and the transfer. So I've just bundled them all together. But essentially, right now we sending messages using the FSP IAP payload. And what we want to do is change them to ISO. Okay. Um, that's a bit silly, but maybe it's a visual representation of it. So when we go to our sequence diagrams in our documentation and we look at the flow of a transfer, and we go to the Moduloop training program, and we look at the how we describe people need to interact with the system and the 3 phases of the transfer. None of that documentation needs to change, because none of it is changing. It is exactly the same as what it was before. The difference is we are now sending an ISO payload, not an FSP IOP payload. Now, those who understand the flows quite a bit will know that we got payloads in both directions and on both sides. And we don't always have a payload. Like for discovery, we do a get parties, it doesn't have a payload. So that in fact won't have a change at all. So in fact, the order of difficulty in making these changes really starts from the discovery. Discovery is the easiest one because discovery, the get parties, which does the call to the Oracle and then the forwarding on to the payee DFSP, doesn't need to change to ISO at all. But the put parties does the message with the uh, confirming that account does need to go through this translation phase. But the functional aspects of forwarding on that message in the switch is not important. Loop just forwards on that message directly to the payee DFSP. So the effort to get discovery done is minimal. Which is why we're starting with that. The next phase is agreement. And here we've got actually a lot of fields that need changed. But essentially, what Loop's responsibility in that flow is just a routing one. We do also store it in the database as an option. And if that option is turned on, then we do need a translation to the FSP IAP to be able to do it. But so the second phase, and the quotes does use Kafka as well. So this is one level more difficult in terms of doing this work. And then the last one is the transfers because there are multiple components and multiple handlers, and we've got to make sure it works. So that's the sequence in which we're going to be delivering the work, which is my next slide, in fact. What approach are we going to be taking to do this? So the first thing that we've done is to define the API using open API definitions and document it. So that's going and putting in comments, making sure that comments are available, and that we can read and understand the new API. Not everyone's familiar with ISO 20022. So we have a whole lot of technical people who suddenly need to become experts in this standard. So getting good documentation in place is important. So that was our first goal, and we do have one available, and I'll give you a view of that right now. Then our next approach was to devise a standardized translating tool for payloads in both directions. Now, we're doing this a lot, so we are going to be sort of characterizing the performance of this tool. We also want it to be configurable. So we understand that some schemes and some implementations may choose to have a slightly different mapping to what we've done in a standard way. And I'll give you a brief example to describe why. I think when you get to understand the ISO standard better, then you understand why this is really important. But my brief example is identifier for an organization, which is a key part inside Loop, is the DFSP ID. That could be a standardized text, but you might decide in your scheme to use an LEI. And if you do, then you might want to enforce it and use it inside the ISO API calls. So making that change can be done by just updating this sort of configuration for the standardized tool that can do these payload translations, and therefore we become less dependent on that exact mapping. So it's really important that we do have the mapping in place, but it isn't the end. because it's now configurable, schemes themselves can change how they view that mapping, and in fact customize it. And there's a process that you can go through for testing and validating it. So then the third important goal that we're trying to get to is this PTK running ISO 20022 payload and using the existing golden path test collection. So we came up with this idea that building tests is difficult, and then how do you know that your tests in fact verify all the functionality, and if we can translate the current test set, then we've got a massive amount of tests that we can now apply into this new ISO 20022 scheme immediately. That doesn't mean we can't also add our own ISO and not FSP IAP, but just having a tool that can use our existing test set and run those run those API calls using an ISO payload, I think is a massive effort saving. So these top three things are in fact done, and also the discovery side of it. We didn't have a particularly good demonstration of it, but that's because it's hot off the press. I think they actually just in the process of completing these stories. So I've said done, but really they're only going to be properly done in about 2 days. Next on our to-do list is agreements and quotes, transfers, and then the module loop connectors themselves. We need the module loop connectors speaking ISO, and then we would, I think, be in a position to say that we've met and we have a delivered working ISO 20022 module loop. So we are working down that list. So so I don't have too much to say next, but I do have this link here in our API snippets. If you go to our API snippets, for those who don't know, our API snippets is the code version of the API, open API definitions that we use for enforcement. And the reason why we do it in snippets is we maintain the source of the definitions in a common place that we can reuse them for all the different APIs from all the different services, and it allows us to pull different parts of the API together. So it is a really useful approach and resource that has been adopted by the community. So in this API snippets, there is a URL, and if you go to that URL, we have the ISO standard. There's the FSP IAP version 2. We also have now the ISO standard for viewing, and we have some good examples as well. We are improving this as we go along, but it is usable and workable. So we can see the schema, we can see the required fields are starred here, and we can drill into the details. This is that documentation part that I was talking about, and I really do think they've done a good job, and it's readable, and we can follow it and then get to know and understand the ISO standard in more detail. Yes, and this is what a put parties payload looks like, for example. And we
Paul, can you put the link to this, drag out these API snippets in the chat?
Yes, I will. Let me do that right now. And then
I'll
people
put it
can
in.
look at it and
Yeah.
questions.
Thanks.
Julie, what else should I cover? Then, of course, we got the spreadsheet.
I think that's great. So that is exactly what I was expecting. Is there any questions? Okay, so in this case, like we give the floor to James, Paul, making.
Yep, thank you very much. There's one last thing I want to ask Paul before he finished, which was to just give us an idea of timelines and what your priorities are in terms of piloting anything to do with this.
Our current plan is in 2 weeks' time, we will have the ISO functionality working in the hub. There'll be further work to be able to get it to work in the Mojo Loop connector, but that would come shortly after that.
It's an impressively swift timeline. Thank you, Paul.
Well, it's built on some ongoing hard work that's been done over a long period in time. Understanding how to do the translations is really the bulk of the work here.
Yeah. Okay, good. Does anyone have any questions before we move on? No, apparently not. That was all very straightforward, apparently. So great. Thank you, Paul. And I think we now hand over to James on his work on adapting existing IPS's 2,222 implementations to FSP IOP as the transitional step. So over to you, James.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Yes, there are adopters out there right now who have APIs based on ISO 2022 with their own specializations that were designed before the work that we've done with the ISO board, thanks to Michael, to standardize the messaging for inclusive payment systems. Our friends in Rwanda have an implementation of Mojaloop right now that speaks their particular flavor of ISO. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration now of a similar POC we built for some friends who are also considering using Mojaloop. This is a proof of concept demo that shows the basic pattern, one basic pattern that adopters have been using to replace core switch technology with Mojaloop, but retain the same external flavor of ISO 20022 protocol. This is very much a stepping stone on the way to the native Mojaloop ISO implementation, which, as you just heard, is coming along very soon. In the meantime, if you have an existing switch business and your API is based on ISO, then you can apply this pattern to start using Mojaloop technology to unlock in the future those steps towards the Mojaloop payment flows that have those inclusive properties that we love so much, the level 1 principles in the flows. So view this as a stepping stone along the way to the Mojaloop ISO flows. I'm going to share a video. This is a pre-recorded demonstration. I've learnt my lesson over the years. In doing live demos. So I'm very much hoping this is going to work. If I click the right buttons in Zoom. Just make sure I can see anybody's hands up for questions or chat. It's about a 15-minute video. I'll probably cut it short because there's some additional stuff at the end that's not really relevant. Okay, without further ado, let's just do a little sound check first and make sure the videos and sound is coming through clearly for everybody. So I'll pause once I start speaking in the video, just to make sure everyone can hear okay.
Hello, this is James Bush, Engineering Director at the Mojaloop Foundation. I'd like to show you a proof of concept.
Is my audio and video coming through clearly?
Yep, I
perfectly.
think
Yeah,
it is, but the image is a bit blurry. Is it only on my side?
slightly blurry, but
Yeah, also a bit blurred for me.
yeah,
Getting better.
Um,
no, that's fine now. I think it's just slow
might be a bad,
to do it.
Better indeed now.
might be a
Mine
bad.
is fun.
Okay, let's see how we go. Off we go. I'll just back up a few seconds.
Loop Foundation. I'd like to show you a proof of concept that we've recently built to illustrate how Mojaloop can be adapted so it may operate in a scheme that uses the IPSL specific flavor of the ISO 20022 protocol.
My video seems to have frozen. Bear with me.
So it may operate
Is anybody else having issues?
Well, not hearing anything.
Yeah, it seems to have frozen. Let
And
me
now
try.
we're getting some abuse from an AI, believe it or not.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. The video seems to be playing, but the audio not. It's not moving on my screen. Let me try resharing, see if I can see what's going on here. My audio's disappeared. What's going on here? Apologies. Try resharing. Normal service will be resumed shortly. Share sound. Optimize for video clip. Yep. Why is it not working? I'm going to try killing that and reopening.
that uses the IPSL specific flavor of the ISO 20022 protocol to communicate with scheme participants. So on the screen is an illustration of a test setup that I'm going to use for demonstration purposes. I'll show you two transfer flows in operation, one sending and one receiving from a participant interacting purely with the IPSL ISO protocol with a Mojaloop hub and a receiving participant in the back end, in this case speaking Mojaloop API that we call FSP IOP. So the components in this system are quite simple. Some of them are being simulated. So I'm using a tool called the Mojaloop Testing Toolkit to simulate the Mojaloop hub and a receiving DFSP. But the interface that's exposed by this toolkit is exactly the same as a Mojaloop hub. I'm going to start by injecting a credit transfer request, a PAX 008 message, as if it's coming from the payer DFSP. That's going to reach a component, this new component that we've built, a translation layer between the IPSL API and the Moduloop API, and using components of the Moduloop integration toolkit, such as the Moduloop connector. These two components will work together to perform a translation between the API protocols and manage the various asynchronous message flows involved in both APIs. Once the PAX 008 is received by the ISO connector, it will initiate a Moduloop send transfer by calling an API on the Moduloop connector, and the parameters taken from the PAX 008 will be passed into a Moduloop connector API request. The Moduloop connector will translate those into a Moduloop FSP IOP API request. In this case, actually three requests: a party lookup, and what we call our agreement phase, the quotation phase as it's sometimes known, followed by a final clearing phase. And we'll see all of those API requests in Moduloop form appear at the Moduloop hub. Okay, without further ado, I'm using a tool called Postman that you might be familiar with. It's an API testing tool. And in Postman, I have a test case with a pre-generated PAX 008 that I'm going to use to simulate a credit transfer request coming from one participant being sent to another participant. So this is one of the example messages given to me by IPSL that has the required elements completed. I'm going to send this request, and you'll see immediately, almost immediately, it receives a 200 OK response. Now if I look into the log I have running on my simulation of a core banking system, I should see that that credit transfer request, once it's passed through all the API flows, will have resulted in a PAX 002 response saying the payment was successful. So if I have a look in my log of returned messages, received requests, we should see one message coming back. And if we look into this, we should see that it's a PAX 002. There we go. And if I look further along in the message, I'll see the various fields being populated, the original message IDs. The important thing to note here is the transaction status has been accepted, ACCP. So that means the flow has gone all the way through the various phases of the Moduloop transfer and come back. The Moduloop connector has returned a successful response to our translation layer, which is then forwarded a PAX 002 response message, which follows the IPSL API specification back to the sender asynchronously. So now I'm going to have a look at the logs on the Moduloop hub via the testing toolkit. As we watch that transfer, I'm going to send the same transfer again. And this time, when my monitoring screen is open, we'll see the various requests hit the Moduloop switch. So there we go, the quoting phase request in Moduloop API form, the response being sent, and the clearing request and the clearing response with a fulfillment and a transfer state of committed on the Moduloop side. So that's a successful transfer from the payer's side, and the payer has only been interacting via the IPSL ISO 20022 API. And yet the Moduloop side has been working in Moduloop API, and the transfer has passed successfully all the required parameters through both. So now I'll show you funds moving in the opposite direction, a credit transfer being received by the translation layer. And in this case, I'm simulating the receiving DFSP core banking system, and I'll show you the receipt of the PAX 008, the credit transfer request here, and then I have my mock core banking system configured, so it will send a PAX 002 in response to say the transfer has been accepted by the banking core. That acceptance will pass again through the translation layer into Moduloop protocol and be sent back to the Moduloop hub. And we'll see the successful transfer being received at the Moduloop hub. So the initiation of this transfer will be through the Moduloop testing toolkit, where I have a test case already configured to do the 3 stages of a Moduloop transfer: a get parties, a post quotes, and a post transfers. So I'll run this test, and then I'll show you the various logs. Okay, so 28 of 28 steps in the test. The test assertions have all passed. So now I'll show you the test report. You can see everything is green in the test report. If we look at the details on a peer-to-peer transfer happy path, we can see the 3 phases, the party lookup, again, which has been mocked in this case, but the quotation request. So in this case, the Moduloop connector is configured to respond to the party lookup and the quotation request in a particular way. So some more development work on this translation layer would be required after this basic proof of concept to pass those party lookup requests and the exchange of fees, etc. Although that could all be pre-configured in the Moduloop connector. But the important phase here is that we receive a successful transfer in the end. The clearing step succeeds in Moduloop protocol. So the receiver here, the DFSP here, his core has been talking again IPSL ISO 20022 API, but all its interactions with the Moduloop hub has been via Moduloop API. So we'll see the final transfer message saying the transfer has been committed, and there's a cryptographic fulfillment in the Moduloop terms showing that everything's a-okay. So there we go. That's basic proof of concept of peer-to-peer with a few caveats around the party lookup still not being complete, but demonstrating the translation from the IPSL ISO 20022 into Moduloop API, and that working both ways, send and receive.
Okay, I'm going to pause the demo there. Does anybody have any questions for me at this point? Did you all see and hear the video okay?
I certainly did, James.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jolly good.
Is that core connector that you built, is that available? Is it in the Moduloop repos?
It's not in the Moduloop repos yet, but it will be very soon, Paul. It's actually based on an already existing connector that was in the Payment Manager open source repo that was built by Infotech some years ago. So that gave me a really good head start, actually. The amount of effort, I mean, I spent probably 3 or 4 days tweaking that existing connector to work specifically with this flavor of ISO.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Is that the TypeScript version?
It is, yes.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I have nothing but praise for the original authors of that core connector, Stephen Oderey and Miguel as well, both contributed to that, and it was really nice to work with. Really easy piece of work to build upon.
Okay, good to know.
Yes, any other questions from anyone? No? Any general questions on the overall approach to ISO 222 at the moment? No. Okay, good. Thank you, everyone. Julie, do you have any closing comments on this?
No, I'm good. I think we cover everything. Again, like if everybody wants to contribute, please join the ISO Slack channel and we can definitely talk.
Okay, great. And I have put the link to the API snippets in the ISO 222 Slack channel if anyone wants to follow up on that. Thank you to Paul for sharing that. And I think we can finish there. So thank you everyone for your attention today and see you next week.
Thanks very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Right.
Well done.
Thank you.